All right, today we're diving into a pretty wild online article that makes a really radical argument about the future of California. Now, our goal here isn't to agree or disagree, it's just to unpack how the author builds their case, step by step, to see how they get to their pretty shocking conclusion. So let's get right into it.
Right out of the gate, the author, who writes under the name The Appalachian Gorilla, hits you with this. This divorce is inevitable. Just 5 words, but man, it's a powerful way to start. It frames this whole thing not as a debate, but as a foregone conclusion. This isn't just a critique, it's a declaration of what they believe has to happen. And that idea is the thread we're going to follow.
So here's the roadmap for how they build this argument. We'll start with their main thesis, then look at the historical backbone they use to support it. After that, we'll zero in on their specific case study, California, before getting to their big, controversial solution. And finally, we'll look at the philosophy they use to tie it all together.
First up is that provocative thesis. The author's whole argument really kicks off with this massive claim that most of us completely misunderstand what the United States even is. They argue it's not this single unified nation we think it is, but something else, and that this basic misunderstanding is where all the problems start.
You see, to even get to the whole California thing, you first have to get your head around this idea. The author says the U.S. isn't a nation in the classic sense. It's an empire, basically a collection of different lands and peoples acquired over time. And the most important word there, in their view, is fragile. They see this structure as inherently unstable. So how in the world do they back up a claim that big? Well, they hit you with a super fast-paced history of American expansion. The whole point is to show you just how quickly the U.S. grew and to hammer home how recently a lot of the country actually became, part of the country.
And this timeline is really their Exhibit A. I mean, just look at the dates. It starts in 1784, but then, boom, 1803, the Louisiana Purchase literally doubles the size of the country. And then it's just this cascade, Texas, California, a whole rush of states in 1889. Arizona doesn't even get admitted until 1912. The author's point is that in the grand scheme of history, a huge chunk of this union is actually really, really new.
So, the big takeaway from that history blitz is this. The United States as we know it is a pretty recent invention. And by framing it as an empire, they can then point out that it's already collapsed once before, referring to the Civil War. This historical setup is absolutely crucial, because if it's a new empire that's already fallen apart once, they're laying the groundwork for the idea that it could, and maybe should, happen again.
Okay, so with that fragile empire theory in our heads, let's see how they apply it directly to California. The author basically uses the Golden State as their prime example of a piece of the empire that just doesn't fit anymore.
And here it is. This is the absolute cornerstone of their argument. It's all about this traumatic demographic shift. They start by saying that back in the day, California was 96% white. Then they contrast that with their claim today that 50% of the state is Mexican. Now, it's really important to note that the author uses that specific phrase, while official census data would use broader terms like Hispanic. For the author, though, this shift isn't just a number. It's proof of a fundamental, irreversible change in what California is.
And to prop up this claim, they point to what they see as a major cultural and political divide. They bring up examples of local California governments resisting federal immigration agents, and they even mention the president of Mexico commenting on U.S. policy. To the author, these aren't just isolated incidents. They're symptoms of a state whose loyalties are split.
And all of that leads to this key question. This is where the article really pivots from just analyzing the situation to actually proposing something. By asking, at what point do you accept that this state may be lost, the author is basically trying to convince you the battle is already over. And that, of course, sets the stage for their very unconventional solution.
Okay, this brings us to what is, without a doubt, the most provocative part of the whole piece, the author's actual plan for California. This isn't just about accepting change, it's about taking a very specific and very drastic political step.
The author lays out 2 possible paths forward. They mention a violent option first, talking about war or genocide, but they immediately dismiss it as something society isn't ready for. And that brings them to their preferred solution, a political one. The core of their entire proposal is to just revoke California's statehood and turn it into a U.S. territory, kind of like what Puerto Rico is now.
So, what would that actually mean? Well, in the author's vision, a territorial California would get to do its own thing locally, but it would lose all its power on the national stage. Let's break down exactly what they say would happen.
The way the author presents it, this is essentially a trade-off. So on one side, California would lose all its electoral votes, its senators, its members of Congress. Basically, its voice in Washington, D.C. is gone. But in exchange, it gets the freedom to create its own local government, which the author guesses might become socialist, and to forge its own distinct culture, which they creatively call a Mexican Canada.
And finally, the author zooms back out to give us the big picture philosophy behind this whole wild idea. The proposal for California isn't just about one state. It's about a completely different way of looking at what a country is and how it should face the future. This quote really captures their final message. Their whole argument is basically a call to stop resisting what they see as inevitable. Instead of fighting tooth and nail against demographic and cultural shifts, they argue that we should be trying to adapt with better solutions. And their plan to turn California into a territory is, in their mind, exactly that.
And so, we're left with the central question that the article poses. Whether you agree with the author's history, their data, or their crazy solution, their argument really forces you to think about this fundamental choice. When you're faced with massive, sweeping change, is it better to dig in your heels and fight it, or is it better to find new, maybe even radical ways to adapt? That's really the question at the heart of this whole thing.